The New Testament has 27 books. True, the New Testament contains 27 books, starting with the Gospel of Matthew. Jesus was born in Nazareth. False. Jesus was born in Bethlehem, according to the New Testament. The Gospel of John is the first book in the New Testament. False. The Gospel of Matthew is the first book in the New Testament. Paul wrote the majority of the letters in the New Testament. True, Paul is traditionally credited with writing 13 epistles. The book of Acts describes the life of Jesus. False. The book of Acts describes the early church after Jesus' ascension. The Sermon on the Mount is found in the Gospel of Luke. False. The Sermon on the Mount is found in the Gospel of Matthew. The book of Revelation was written by John. True, the book of Revelation is traditionally attributed to John the Apostle. Jesus performed his first miracle at a wedding in Cana. True, Jesus turned water into wine at a wedding in Cana. The Apostle Peter denied Jesus 3 times before the rooster crowed. True, Peter denied knowing Jesus 3 times before the rooster crowed. The New Testament was originally written in Latin. False. The New Testament was originally written in Greek. The Gospel of Mark is the shortest of the 4 Gospels. True, the Gospel of Mark is the shortest of the 4 Gospels with 16 chapters. Paul was present at the stoning of Stephen. True, Paul, then Saul, witnessed and approved of Stephen's stoning. The Last Supper took place on Passover. True, the Last Supper was a Passover meal Jesus shared with his disciples. The New Testament teaches that salvation is through faith alone. True, salvation by faith is a central teaching in the New Testament. Judas Iscariot betrayed Jesus for 50 pieces of silver. False. Judas betrayed Jesus for 30 pieces of silver. The Gospel of Matthew was written by a tax collector. True, Matthew, a former tax collector, is traditionally believed to have written the Gospel of Matthew. The New Testament begins with the book of Genesis. False. The New Testament begins with the Gospel of Matthew. Jesus was crucified under the Roman governor Pilate. True, Pontius Pilate was the Roman governor who sentenced Jesus to crucifixion. Paul was shipwrecked 3 times. True, according to 2 Corinthians, Paul was shipwrecked 3 times. The first Christian martyr was James. False. Stephen is recognized as the first Christian martyr. The book of Hebrews is attributed to Paul. False. The authorship of Hebrews is uncertain. It's traditionally attributed to Paul, but not definitively. Jesus was baptized in the Jordan River. True, Jesus was baptized by John the Baptist in the Jordan River. The New Testament ends with the book of Romans. False. The New Testament ends with the book of Revelation. The Gospel of Luke was written for a Gentile audience. True, Luke's Gospel is particularly addressed to Gentiles. The term Christian first appears in the book of Acts. True, the term Christian was first used in Antioch as recorded in Acts. The New Testament records the death of the Apostle John. False. The New Testament does not record John's death. The New Testament includes 4 Gospels. True, the New Testament contains 4 Gospels: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead. True, Jesus performed the miracle of raising Lazarus from the dead in John 11. The Gospel of Mark is the last gospel written. False. The Gospel of John is generally considered the last of the 4 Gospels to be written. Jesus was tempted by Satan in the wilderness for 40 days. True, Jesus was tempted by Satan in the wilderness for 40 days as recorded in the Synoptic Gospels. The Apostle Paul was originally a Pharisee. True, Paul was originally a Pharisee known as Saul before converting to Christianity. The Gospel of Matthew contains the Beatitudes. True, the Beatitudes are found in the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew 5. The book of Revelation is the longest book in the New Testament. False. The Gospel of Luke is the longest book in the New Testament. The Apostle Peter wrote the Epistle to the Hebrews. False. The authorship of Hebrews is uncertain. It is not attributed to Peter. The New Testament mentions the birth of Jesus in all 4 Gospels. False. The birth of Jesus is only mentioned in Matthew and Luke. The book of Acts was written by the Apostle Paul. False. The book of Acts was written by Luke, the same author of the Gospel of Luke. Jesus' genealogy is found in both Matthew and Luke. True, both Matthew and Luke contain genealogies of Jesus, though they differ. The Great Commission is recorded in the Gospel of John. False. The Great Commission is recorded in the Gospel of Matthew. Jesus' Sermon on the Plain is found in the Gospel of Matthew. False. The Sermon on the Plain is found in the Gospel of Luke. The book of Revelation includes letters to 7 churches. True, the book of Revelation begins with letters to 7 churches in Asia Minor. The Apostle Paul was beheaded in Rome. True, Paul was traditionally believed to have been martyred by beheading in Rome. The Gospel of Luke emphasizes Jesus' ministry to the poor and outcasts. True, Luke's Gospel highlights Jesus' care for the marginalized. The phrase, "love your neighbor as yourself," is from the New Testament. True, Jesus taught this commandment in the Gospels, originally from Leviticus in the Old Testament. The Gospel of John contains the parable of the Good Samaritan. False, the parable of the Good Samaritan is found in the Gospel of Luke. The New Testament was completed in the 2nd century AD. False, the New Testament was completed by the end of the 1st century AD. The Apostle Thomas doubted Jesus' resurrection until he saw him. True, Thomas is famously known for doubting until he saw the risen Jesus. The New Testament teaches that Jesus will return a second time. True, the New Testament teaches the second coming of Christ. Jesus' last words on the cross were, "It is finished." True, Jesus' last words as recorded in John were, "It is finished." The New Testament includes the 10 Commandments. False, the 10 Commandments are found in the Old Testament in Exodus and Deuteronomy. The Apostle Paul was a disciple of Jesus during his earthly ministry. False, Saul, did not follow Jesus during his earthly ministry, but converted after Jesus' resurrection.